Hey, welcome back. We are at part two of the digestive system. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in and get started. And as always, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my channel so I can continue to give you videos and advice and trade secrets. No, not trade secrets, but anything that might help you out along this journey to either becoming an MA or staying, abreast of the situation and the information in our uh, community. All right, so this is digestive system part two, what the parts do. So in our first part, if you haven't watched that one already, we talked about what is where and what constitutes the digestive system. And in this part, we will actually talk about what those parts do. So starting in the mouth, we talked about earlier that all digestion starts at the mouth with mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion is making the food, breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces by chewing or what we call mastication. Okay, mastication. Be careful with that particular word. Chemical digestion is in the process of breaking down food through saliva or with saliva that contains a salivary enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates primarily called amylase. Amylase is the first enzyme that kind of gets put out there and in the mix while you are chewing up your food. Then the teeth come in and they bite and chew and grind and mechanically help the food to get even smaller. So we have incisors, which are these guys in the front. Those are used to bite into food. Canines, or what we call the cuspids, which are these guys right here. Okay, right here, down here. Okay. Those are slightly pointed, not like a vampire or anything, but slightly pointed, and they're used to tear food. Then your premolars and your molars are, so your back teeth or your bicuspids, are there primarily to grind food. So if you ever really think about it, and I'm sure you probably don't, but you will now, when you bite into something, you bite in the front of your mouth, right? You use these teeth. Then you move them back into the molars to chew and grind, okay? So as I had mentioned in the first video, all the teeth have their own special little jobs. All right, so once all of that is done, the food has gotten to a smaller, more manageable kind of glob, I guess you could call it. There is actually a term for it. It's called the bolus. And the bolus is it's not quite liquid, but it's not quite completely solid. It's the chewed up part of the food. Once you have that, you're going to swallow. Swallowing will then cause the food to travel down the throat and into the esophagus. The esophagus, of course, being the muscular tube that connects the pharynx or the throat to the stomach. It facilitates passage of the food to the stomach. The esophagus, because it is connected up in the neck region, and then goes all the way down into the stomach. We have this huge, and if you've watched my respiratory videos, we have this huge muscle called a diaphragm that actually divides our thoracic or our chest area from our abdomen. And that muscle is situated in a transverse, or it goes across, right, orientation. Um, so there has to be some way for the esophagus to get down there. Okay. There is a way, there is an actual passageway, a little hole called the esophageal hiatus, that is in the center of the diaphragm that the esophagus actually passes through to get to the stomach. Then so the esophagus, here's the esophagus. The diaphragm would be kind of like well, actually it's lower, kind of like right here. Okay. This is up further towards the neck. So your diaphragm's going to sit right about here. Okay. So once that passes through, then you have what is called the lower esophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter, which I had mentioned in our last video on pieces and parts. And it is literally just that. It is a sphincter which controls where the food goes, or rather the direction in which it goes. And it tries to make sure that it only goes the one direction down from the esophagus into the stomach. Now, as we all know, and I mentioned this in the other video, we've all vomited at some point in our lives, and we know that the food oftentimes will come back up. Okay, that is not normal. Does the sphincter allow for it to happen? Well, yeah, it kind of has no choice. It's forced to. But that is not normal. So the sphincter in this case, the lower esophageal sphincter, cardiac sphincter, in this case, is its job is to keep the food moving in one direction under normal circumstances. Okay. So don't run out and go, oh no, but it doesn't always happen that way. Okay. All right. So the esophageal sphincter or lower esophageal sphincter right here regulates food entering the stomach. We talked about the balloon top portion of the stomach before, which is my favorite part, which is the fundus, because it's the fundus part. The body is the middle main portion of the stomach. Then there's the pyloric region, the pyloric sphincter, lesser curvature, greater curvature. And yes, I know I'm pointing to a diagram of a stomach that has arms and legs and is winking at us, but it's okay. You get the gist of it. Now, what we did not talk about before was there are these rather folds inside the lining of the stomach called gastric rugae. Okay. And if you were to look at the inside of a stomach when it's not full of food, when you didn't just eat at the buffet, okay, when it's fairly empty, it has like little bumps and ridges. Okay. Those are folds that not only increase surface area, but they allow for the stretching of the stomach so that when we eat, or more often overeat, wink, wink. Oh, that's why the stomach's winking at us. That's why. Those folds can allow for the stomach to stretch out so we don't hurt ourselves. Okay. All right, let's talk about the glands and the cells that are in the stomach. So there are gastric glands in the stomach that are made up of various cells. Mucus cells are one of them, which, surprise, surprise, secrete mucus to protect the lining of the stomach. There are what are called chief cells. Chief cells secrete a substance called pepsinogen. And pepsinogen, when it clashes or is in the presence of acid, turns into a substance called pepsin. And pepsin is what helps to digest proteins. Okay. Then there are the parietal cells. They secrete hydrochloric acid, and that's the acid that helps turn the pepsinogen into pepsin. Okay. They also secrete what's called intrinsic factor, and intrinsic factor helps to absorb B12, vitamin B12. Now, here's what has always fascinated me. Yes, you're reading this right, and I did say it right. These cells secrete hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid. If I took hydrochloric acid and dumped it on my desk that I'm sitting in front of right now, it would eat a hole through my desk. But yet our stomach has it. And it's these cells here secreting that mucus that's protecting the lining of our stomach, as well as the lining of our stomach is just made to endure this sort of thing as well. but that still has just always gotten me. It's like, wait, I have that in my stomach. Now, this is why it's dangerous, though, if you were to have some type of injury or something where your stomach were to be damaged to the point where it would open up inside of you, because then all of that stuff would go inside your abdominal cavity, and your abdominal cavity is not made to handle that. So that could be very, very dangerous. All right, moving on then to the small intestine, which we know is the next portion down. We had talked about my children, and if that makes no sense to you, shame on you. You should have watched the first one. Um, Duodenum is the first portion of the small intestine, jejunum is the second, and ileum is the last. Now, what happens in the small intestine? Absorption of minerals, vitamins, nutrients, all kinds of things that come out of our stomach. However, the ileum, the last portion, and is what also is the longest portion, is where the most absorption occurs. Okay, because the ileum's the last portion, that is right before it enters into the large intestine or the colon. And by the time it gets there, we're hoping there's not a whole lot left. Okay. There's a tissue that holds the small intestine in place in the abdominal cavity called the mesentery. And it's kind of just a really thin tissue that kind of fans out and holds everything in place. Lining the small intestine, there are cells that are called microvilli, and microvilli not only help things to kind of move through, but it also increases the surface area for absorption. Now, when I say that, let's look at this little guy over here. Okay. He's technically supposed to be an enzyme, but I can use him to kind of show you what I mean when I talk about increasing surface area. So imagine this black line around this little cartoon guy was just a straight line. Okay. Let's say just, there was just a straight line from, say, here to here, right? That would be the only place, the surface of that straight line would be the only place that things could absorb. Okay. But once you take and make these little valleys and peaks, okay, which is basically what microvilli look like. They look like little projections, little fingers, okay? Now you have far more places where you can absorb. If you had just a straight line, you could only absorb anywhere on that line. But now if you had something like this, you could have things absorbing here, 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 everywhere. Okay. That's what microvilli do. They increase the surface area, so there's more places for stuff to absorb. Okay. The lining of the small intestine also secretes enzymes, which, like I said, is what this little guy is supposed to be, to digest the various foods that might still be present in the small intestine. Well, that are definitely present in the small intestine. Pep peptis I can never say this word. Peptases digest protein. Sucrase, maltase, and lactase digest sugars. And intestinal lipase digests fats. Okay, so anything that ends in ASE is an enzyme. Okay. Lactase is in particular might be something that is one of the enzymes that people are familiar with, because that is a very specific enzyme that digests the sugars in milk. And if you do not have this particular enzyme, or you are lacking in the amount of it that you need, that is when you become lactose intolerant. And those don't get broken down. And then it makes your tummy upset. And then you wind up spending the night in the bathroom. So there you go. Okay. All right. Moving on to the large intestine. Here's the large intestine. We have the cecum, the kind of bulbous, very first portion of the large intestine. We have the little appendix, which is just a small projection off the cecum. They're like this big, they're tiny. So tiny that it's amazing they cause that much trouble when they get angry. Um, for the longest time, the medical community didn't think that the appendix did anything or had any purpose other than to cause pain. Um, More recently, though, they have discovered that it could play a part in the immune system or an immune response. And when I say most recently, or more recently rather, I mean in the last probably 5 to 15 years. So just so you're aware, it's not like it happened yesterday. The ascending colon is on the right side of the colon. The transverse is the top side. The descending is the left side of the colon. The sigmoid colon is this little S-shaped area down here. The rectum is after the sigmoid colon where it starts to straighten out. The anal canal is just an extension of the rectum. And then the anus, of course, is the opening of the colon to the outside of the body where everything leaves the body vis-a-vis feces. Okay. The lining of the intestine secretes mucus to help everything slide through nicely. There are a couple things that are of note with the large intestine or the colon. As contents, we'll just say contents. I didn't know products, contents. I don't know what. As stuff moves through it. It can move at a very quick pace. It can move at a very slow pace, or it can move at a very normal pace. We want a normal pace, okay? Because one of the other things that the colon does, aside from just allowing a tract, and a way for the waste products and everything to leave the body, is it absorbs water as things are moving through it. So if there's any water left in any of the contents that are moving through the large intestine, it'll absorb that back because our body wants to hold on to water, right? We don't want to be dehydrated. So where you come up with problems, and why I say not too fast, not too slow, um, where you seem to come into issues is when those contents are moving too quickly or too slowly. Because think about it, if they move too quickly through the colon doesn't have a chance to absorb any of that extra water. And now you have very watery stool, which, as we all know, is called diarrhea. Okay. And nobody likes to have diarrhea. If it moves too slowly, then it's passing by where the water is being absorbed in a very slow manner. Therefore, the colon is absorbing all the water. And now we're constipated because it's too dry. Okay. So that's why I say we want the contents that move through the colon to move at a very normal pace. So the body can still reabsorb some of that water, but not so much of it or so little of it that we run into issues. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Moving into our accessory organs, we have the liver. Liver is a reddish brown colored organ, separated into lobes or lobules. There is a portal vein called the hepatic portal vein that carries blood from the digestive organs to those lobules. Inside of there, we have what are called hepatocytes. Now remember, cyte, C-Y-T-E, means cell, okay? So the fact that it is a hepatocyte means it is a liver cell, because hepato, or hepat, is liver. So these are hepatic cells, and these are the cells that process nutrients and make bile, okay? Bile is basically a fat emulsifier, okay? And we'll talk about it here in just a minute, a little more in depth. As we saw in the last video, There is a common hepatic duct, which is formed by the left and right hepatic ducts. And that hepatic duct merges then with the cystic duct from the gallbladder to form the bile duct, which then delivers bile to the duodenum. Okay. The liver also stores vitamins and iron and helps to metabolize. Pretty much all the medications we take are metabolized through the liver, as well as any of the alcohol that we drink. Okay. That is why when someone it drinks quite a bit, they can have problems with their liver. That is also why when somebody is on a lot of medications or medications that they take regularly, maintenance medications, the provider will generally have them do blood work every so often to check their liver functions to make sure that those medications are not damaging their liver to the point where it's going to be a big problem. Moving on to the gallbladder, cute little guy. The gallbladder is a small sac-like structure. The cystic duct, which is right here, merges with the hepatic duct to become the common bile duct. The gallbladder's main purpose is to store bile until it is needed. Then a hormone called cholecystokinin, yeah, say that 5 times fast, we just call it CCK, triggers the gallbladder to release bile. Now, what causes CCK to trigger? The presence of fat. Because bile, its whole job is to emulsify fat. That's what bile salts do. They also, though, help to increase the absorption of certain things like fatty acids and cholesterol and lipid-soluble vitamins. But it's pretty much all things fat, okay, that bile deals with. Now, as I had mentioned in our previous video, you do not need your gallbladder to live. A lot of people have theirs removed for various reasons. I do not have mine. So basically what happens when you don't have a gallbladder is you just don't have a storage facility anymore. So the bile that's produced up here, the liver would be here, the bile that's produced by the liver just literally goes straight down and into the small intestine. It doesn't hang out here and wait. So that can, for some people, be an issue where since the bile doesn't have a holding area and isn't being released, little bits at a time because there's fat present, oftentimes this can cause, if you eat fatty foods, can cause it to kind of overdo it a little bit and you find yourself rushing to the restroom. I was warned of this when I had mine taken out, and it really didn't bother me all that much. It's funny, really, the bad fats, like a nice greasy cheeseburger, not an issue. The good fats, however, like avocados, yeah, I can't handle them. So go figure. Go figure. All right. On to the pancreas. Here's the pancreas, kind of hanging out on the small intestine. Pancreatic juices contain enzymes, various enzymes. One is pancreatic amylase, which digests carbohydrates. Pancreatic lipase, which digests lipids. Nucleases, I don't know, which digests nucleic acids. Trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. Say that 5 times fast. Those all digest proteins, and those all come from the pancreas. All right, let's talk about a few problems that can occur with the digestive system. I was actually going to make a separate video on this, but then I decided to just add it in here. So appendicitis is probably a very well-known digestive system issue. It's the inflammation of the appendix. It can be caused by a blockage or infection, or just because I think the little guy doesn't like us. I think the appendix hates us. But generally, appendicitis is very, very, very painful and will usually require surgery just to remove it, and then everything's fine after that. Cholelithiasis are basically what's also known as gallstones. It could be gallbladder pain, a condition of gallbladder pain. Um, Generally, again, usually what happens is just surgical removal of the gallbladder, which is called a cholecystectomy, by the way. Not a gallbladderectomy. I know, it's confusing. Um, but that is really the only way to take care of that. And gallbladder pain and gallstones can have a variety of causes, quite honestly. Diet is a big one of them. Cirrhosis is a chronic liver disease. It is known to be an autoimmune disease where the body is attacking itself, as well as caused by medications and overuse of alcohol. Colitis is inflammation of the large intestine. Colorectal cancer, of course, is a very common type of cancer. It is, however, curable if treated early, caught and treated early. Crohn's disease is also known as inflammatory bowel disease, which is also an autoimmune illness. Diverticulitis is an inflammation of the diverticula, which are basically the little pouches in the large intestine. If you noticed on diagrams of the small and large intestine, the small intestine is nice and smooth, where the large intestine or the colon has like little bubbles. Um, those can become irritated, and if food gets stuck in them, like little tiny like seeds and things get stuck in them, it can cause what is called diverticulitis, or where that inflames. Gastritis is inflammation of the lining of the stomach, which is also sometimes just called stomach upset. Many causes for this. Gastroesophageal reflux is GERD, um, more commonly known as heartburn. Commonly, this is a chronic illness, though, and medications are usually what is involved with treating that. Hepatitis is inflammation of the liver. There are various types of hepatitis, A, B, and C, all acquired in different ways. Other A is fecal to oral route. B is usually from needle sticks. That's hepatitis B is actually one of the, if not the most common disease for healthcare workers to obtain, and it usually comes from accidental needle stick, but it is a bloodborne issue because they're all from a virus. And then hepatitis C is usually a sexually transmitted form. Um, and only B has a vaccine. No, I'm sorry. A and B have vaccines for it. Only C does not, but C is treatable and even now curable. Hiatal hernia is when a portion of the stomach protrudes out through the diaphragm. We talked about the little hole in the diaphragm where the esophagus goes through. It's called the esophageal hiatus. Well, if for some reason that little area gets stretched out or something causes the stomach to push up through it, that is what is known as a hiatal hernia. And then stomach ulcers, of course, are when the stomach lining starts to break down. This can be caused by too much stomach acid, just breaking down little by little the lining. Can also be caused by bacteria. One in particular, the most common, is called Helicobacter pylori or H. pylori, probably the most common. But these are just a few of the various medical conditions that we see if we work with people in either GI or even family medicine. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. Again, if you have not already, please click that like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.